All right, folks, welcome back to the channel. We're going to have a deep dive today. We're going to look at Synagogue of Satan. I found a lot more since the last that you saw, and we're going to cover that. I'm also going to do my best. I know I overwhelmed you the last time. I'm going to do my best to kind of break this down so that you can understand. There's a lot of history and people involved that we must understand to understand how we got from A to B to Z. Okay, so the temple, the synagogue of Satan, Yeshua. Let me just set the stage here. Yeshua came on the scene because the sacrifice and the covering of animals was just a temporary thing. And besides that, the high priest and men in general kind of messed up that system that Yah gave us that was temporary, which was the temple system. Okay, so by the time that Yeshua was coming on the scene, he has come to reconcile these things, to call out the deceivers, the ones who hijacked everything. You remember in the Gospels where you see Yeshua, every time he interacted with the Pharisees, it was contentious. It was almost as if he was trying to antagonize them. Over and over again, you see this theme. Anyway, we're going to learn about the history, how we got here. Who is the synagogue of Satan? Did you know that Yeshua actually identifies who these people are, as well as John? So this is not accusation. This is not conjecture where I'm just throwing things around. And by the way, I am not anti-Semitic at all. Those that are surrounding me in my immediate circle, my best friends, happen to be Jewish and formerly Talmudic. Okay, my good friend Michael, I've known for a couple of years. I've been, sharing some things with him indirectly because you can't beat people over the head with the Bible. So you got to be wise. He was privy to conversations I would have about the Bible on the phone with other people, and he would just observe. And then there came a point where he started asking me questions and engaging me in that way. And it's a beautiful thing because all he knew all his life was Talmud. And they come against Yeshua, even talk bad about Yeshua, but he has a new perspective now. He sees Yeshua differently, and he is not for the Talmud. My good friend, Rabbi Jacob, you guys have heard me talking about him, who has moved. I mean, he came from several generations of rabbis and eventually found Yeshua. So I have love. And so doing this is not to beat anybody over the head. It's to bring information. I love everybody. I don't want to see anybody, die or go to hell or anything like that, folks. And so this comes from a place of love. I had to say that because this is going to seem kind of harsh. When you see what the synagogue of Satan had, what's encoded there, it's going to seem harsh, right? It's going to seem like Jonathan's being hateful, but that is not the case. So let's back up and get an understanding. I got a YouTube channel. It's one of my favorites. I like visuals, right? Charts, flow charts. And so I want to start here, short clip with a visual, so you can see the progression of how we got here. Because you see, Yah destroyed his own temple. That is a huge statement. He ripped from the top to bottom the veil, which is symbolic of the high priest annulling the high priesthood. Yeshua came to give the final account. He is the final lamb to be slaughtered, and that system was done away with. So we're going to start right here, okay?
Simply have a different.
By the way, you go to useful charts. This guy, his name's Matt Baker, does a phenomenal job with laying things out. And it's not just about, the Bible. I mean, it could be anything. Go and look at all the charts he has. It's phenomenal, but very useful resources.
Way of obtaining it. The further assumption, based mostly on the writings of Paul, is that Jews try to obtain salvation by obeying Jewish law.
Okay, so let's understand something about the difference between Judaism and Christianity. Christianity is the culmination of everything that's happened, the crescendo of the temple being destroyed in 70 AD, Yeshua was the final sacrifice, right? Obtain salvation, obtained through faith in Yeshua. How does the Jews have salvation? Do you know how they have salvation? How they believe? Obeying the law? It's keeping what the rabbis say. Mishnah, the Talmud, the way to salvation for Jews, and this is why Paul addresses it, works. You're not saved by works. And that is the only way that Judaism, because they won't accept the Lamb, the only thing that they can do is works. And so they had something called the mitzvot, keeping doing good deeds, charity, doing things to obtain mercy from the Father. This is why Paul addresses it, folks. And you think he's talking to Christians in the future who are trying to keep the Torah to get into heaven. That is not who he's talking to. He is talking about those in Judaism that keep it by the mitzvot, the good deeds, to get into heaven. That is how they think that they can do it without a temple. Remember, there's no atonement. They can't atone for the nations anymore. And they couldn't even atone for the nations when Yeshua was on the scene. The Ark of the Covenant was not present. So what were they doing? They were doing mitzvot, and Yeshua came against that. It seemed like he was coming against the Torah. No, he was coming against the Talmud.
But that's simply not true, because there is no such thing as original sin in Judaism, nor is there much of a focus on the exact details surrounding the afterlife. To put it simply, Jews do not follow Jewish law in order to be saved from some future punishment or in order to gain some future reward. For some Jews, they followed the law simply because God told them to. For others, it's because we believe that many of those laws, which we call mitzvot, serve a purpose in the here and now. The best way.
So he just contradicts it. So bless his heart. And that is his understanding. But from my perspective and my experience and talking with rabbis, do have the understanding that they do keep the mitzvot because they can't atone. Okay?
The way that I can explain this is by giving the following analogy. In our modern society, we have many traffic laws that are designed to keep everyone safe. If you break one of those laws, say by going too fast in your car, you might get a ticket as a punishment. But do you obey the traffic rules simply because you don't want a ticket? Perhaps, but I hope that you also obey them because, for example, you don't want to hit some kid while passing through a school zone. Likewise, one of the Jewish mitzvot is to rest on Shabbat, or of the Christian denominations.
This is where I wanted to get to, right
put
here.
a stronger emphasis on doing. So with that under our...
All right, here we are. We're starting with the split of the kingdom has already happened. Many of you don't even realize, because when you say Judah or Jews, you think Israel. That's all of Israel. That is not the case according to the Bible. The kingdom was split. There was a southern and a northern kingdom, Judah and Israel. Okay? Israel went into diaspora. Judah went into exile. So the northern 10 tribes were scattered to the world for over 2,000 years. They would not make a presence. Okay? They went into the kingdoms and the nations where they went, they blended in. All right? Judah, exiled for 70 years in Babylon, were the ones who came back, right? All right, so
belts.
let's
now
here.
Look at the family tree. As I mentioned in episode 1 of the Christian Denominations series, Judaism has its roots in ancient Israelite religion, which was practiced by the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Israel and Judah were relatively small kingdoms, but they happened to be located right in between two of the most important centers of civilization in the ancient world, Egypt and Mesopotamia, which is why Egypt and then later Assyria and Babylon played such a huge role in their history. Now, there are two main explanations for where ancient Israelite religion came from. One, of course, is that it came directly from God through divine revelation. specifically when Moses received the Torah. The other is that it developed slowly over time, based on its interactions with both Egypt and Mesopotamia.
All right, so a side note here. It's important to understand that where we're starting in this study is right at the Second Temple period, from 537 BCE to 70 AD when it was destroyed. That's the period that we're dealing with now. This is the period that Yeshua existed, but it's also this is the place where the exiles came back, and then we see different types of beliefs on the scene: the Samaritans, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots, and the Sadducees. All right.
In fact, the scholarly consensus nowadays is that the Israelites actually started out as a subset of Canaanites and then slowly went from polytheism to monotheism over time. Either way, what we're concerned with here is what happened during the late Iron Age. Basically, Israel fell to the Assyrians and Judah fell to the Babylonians. But then following a brief exile in Babylon, the former inhabitants of Judah, now called Jews, were able to return to their land and rebuild their temple, which is why Judaism between 537 BCE and 70 CE is known as Second Temple Judaism. During this time, it was influenced by both Zoroastrianism, which was the religion of the Persians, as well as by Hellenism, which was the religion of the Greeks. But most importantly, by this point, Judaism was definitely monotheistic,
and this is why we see a Hellenized high priest at the time of Yeshua. What was his name? Caiaphas. Caiaphas. He was a Greek Jew. They had mixed, right? And they had taken on some of the beliefs of the Greeks. So this is already happening. This diluting of what a Jew is has already started. How bad do you think it gets after 2,000 years? Just a thought.
Is to this day its defining feature. However, by the time that the Romans took over, there were four major sects within Second Temple Judaism: the Pharisees, who represented the everyday people; the Essenes, who were a mystical bunch; the Zealots, who wanted to fight against the Romans; and the Sadducees, who were the elites who ran the temple. To this was added a fifth group, the early Christians. However, Christianity quickly became a separate, mostly Gentile, meaning non-Jewish religion. The early Christians who...
All right, non-Jew. Does that mean does it mean non-Israel? No, because when Israel, remember the other kingdom over here, Israel and Judah? When Israel was scattered, they became what? Nations. That word Gentile is goyim, which means nations. They were scattered to the nations. So there's a distinction between Jewish and nations. Remember, Israel lost their identity. And who did Yeshua say he came for? He told his disciple, I came only for the lost sheep of Israel, the Gentiles. Okay?
Continued to make.
And by the way, they were not called Christians. They were called Shomerim. They were called Nazarene, which is that word there. Because Yeshua was a Nazarene, they were called Nazarene.
Jewish traditions, such as the Ebionites and Nazarenes, eventually went extinct, although there is evidence that they had an influence on the development of Islam before doing so. Anyway,
By the way, that was a strong hand of the Catholic Church that had a hand in Islam.
The Essenes, Zealots, and Sadducees also all went extinct, back when the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple in 70 CE. Thus, the only sect of Second Temple Judaism that survived was that of the Pharisees. Now, the New Testament does not have a lot of nice things to say about the Pharisees. But for Jews today, the Pharisees are actually our spiritual ancestors. After the destruction of Jerusalem, they set up a school in the nearby town of Yavne, known...
You guys heard me talk about that in the last video, how these Pharisees, and it was two main groups. You had the thought of Gamliel, and the other one was Shammai, I think his name is. Two schools of thought. One moved to Yavne, and one went back to Babylon. There was still a community there. And this is where we see the development of the Talmud.
In Christian sources as Jamnia, which is where they helped Judaism evolve from being a temple-based religion to one that is based mostly on communal prayer and on studying the 5 books of Moses, known as the Torah. The scholars at this Yavne school eventually became known as rabbis. Thus, Judaism, as it exists today, can more accurately be called Rabbinic Judaism, in order to distinguish it from the earlier second.
Now, Rabbinic Judaism, as you can see, breaks off into different kinds of sects. Immediately, you start seeing the Karaites on the scene. Who are the Karaites? They rejected the Talmud. That is what Nehemiah Gordon is today. He only keeps the Torah.
Temple Judaism. One of the things that the early rabbis did was to develop the Talmud, which actually has 2 components. The Mishnah, which was written first, and the Gemara, which was written later and consists of commentary on the Mishnah. According to tradition, the Mishnah is based on the oral Torah, which consisted of various clarifications that were given to Moses around the same time as the written Torah. These were supposedly passed down by word of mouth until the time of the rabbis. However, according to modern critical scholarship, the oral Torah likely does not go all the way back to Moses, but it does at least go back to the Second Temple period, to figures like Hillel and Shammai, who lived just prior to the time of Jesus. If you want to learn more about the various rabbis mentioned in the Mishnah, we actually have a video on that, which I'll link.
All right. So we're going to go take a look at this right now. So we're going to track these 2 schools of thought. After the destruction of the temple, these are the main ones we had. All the other sects were gone, and now we are in the time when the temple is destroyed. Temple Judaism is done with. And then what? So what do the rabbis do? They do not follow Yeshua. So what is their choice? They start following themselves, making up their own laws and having their own schools, right? So this is where it starts. Let's go look at that. I'm trying to make this quick and not painful for you to sit through. Let's go to the family tree and track that a little bit. So you can see how all these things happen when they broke off, and you got these different sects that come. So again, you can find these charts at Useful Charts. He spent a lot of time putting these together. Let's take a look at this.
Family tree of classical Jewish rabbis. Some of these rabbis were related in the traditional sense, such as those who belonged to the house of Hillel. There we get a series of father-son relationships. However, other rabbis were related only by way of a teacher-student relationship. These are shown on the chart as well, but with thin black arrows indicating who influenced who. Either way, the rabbis we are going to be discussing are the ones whose views ended up being recorded in the Mishnah, which is the earliest part of the Talmud. I'll be using this.
So you can track. So this is the rabbis and Hasmoneans, and then the Greek influence, where we start getting Greek priests. But you can see they've split off from the time of the first temple to the time we get to the second temple. This is actually very complex and kind of confusing, and you have to understand the progression and the history to be able to understand what is happening now and who exactly we are talking about.
This brand new poster designed by fellow YouTuber Sam Aronow. It's titled Early Judaism Family Tree and is available exclusively from usefulcharts.com. If you'd like to buy a copy, you can head over to the website now, or you can click the link on screen at the end of the video.
And by the way, guys, he has got so many, like these flow charts like this that help you understand the timing and when and who the different players are. Very useful. That's why he calls useful charts, right? You get it?
Yadua. So according to...
This is where we're going to start. So between the first temple period and the second temple period, and we're going to start low in the area where the Second Temple's already been rebuilt, and we have Greek influence.
Josephus, it was he who was in charge of the Second Temple in Jerusalem when Alexander the Great conquered Persia. It was thus he who oversaw the transition between Persian rule and Greek rule, something that actually went quite smoothly. Jaddua descendants became known as the Oniads, or the House of Onias, named after the next high priest, Onias I. The Oniads went on to hold the high priesthood for most of the Greek period, with their most famous member being perhaps Simon the Just. During this period, the high priest was certainly the most important Jewish leader. After all, they held a hereditary position that went all the way back to the days of the First Temple. However, other types of religious leaders started to become more and more influential as well. These included various scribes and sages who were experts in Jewish law. Eventually, these other religious leaders split into various factions, the two main ones being the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In this video, we are going to focus on the Pharisees, because it is their intellectual descendants who became known as rabbis, and it was the rabbis who laid the groundwork for post-Temple Judaism. Therefore, the next person I'm going to point out is Antigonus of Soko, who was a student of Simon the Just. Antigonus is quoted as having said, "Be not like servants who serve their master for the sake of reward. Rather, be like servants who do not serve their master for the sake of reward." This idea represented a fundamental shift in Jewish thinking. If you look at almost any story, and good things will happen, bad things will happen to you. So the Antigonus said, no, don't do good to get a reward. This is why, to this day, Jews don't put much of an emphasis on concepts like heaven or on what a person needs to do in order to, quote-unquote, be life, but tend to be matters is that we do what is right in this life without trying to be rewarded for it. Anyway, Antigonus's views ended up having an impact on two men named Yosei ben Yoser and Yosei ben Yohanan. Note that in Hebrew, ben simply means son of. So we have a Yosei son of Yoser and a Yosei son of Yohanan. These two men were the first to serve as the leaders of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a
I just want to point out, he is going down one side of the flow chart. There's another side of this flow chart, which is the Hasmonean part. And you can see the Greek influence here. So again, we are focused on the Pharisees because we're getting to a point on the Synagogue of Satan and who this is and who Yeshua identifies as the Synagogue of Satan. So keep that in mind.
a judicial
We are
assembly
missing a lot in this.
that came to exist during the Hasmonean period. The president of this assembly was known as the Nasi, which also means prince, and the vice president was known as the Av Beit Din, which roughly translates as chief justice. So for the next 200 years, we get pairs of leaders, which is why this period is known as the Zugot. Zugot being
All right, Zugot is a period of time of the Talmud, and they have it broke up into periods that way. The Tananim is another, as you're going to hear him say.
being the Hebrew word for pairs. The fifth pair, Hillel and Shammai, are the two most important, or at least the
Look at the dates, 31 BC to 10 CE, right? So who is Hillel? You guys know who Hillel is? All right, and Gamliel comes later, who Paul sat at the feet of, Hillel, okay?
most well-known. They are the founders of two houses, or schools of thought, known as the House of Hillel and the House of Shammai. It is with the emergence of these two houses that we move from the period of the Zugot to the period of the Tanaim. The word Tanaim meaning something like teachers. And it is with the emergence of the Tanaim that one of the most fundamental Jewish traits was born, the tendency to see value in argument and disagreement. As the saying goes, for every 2 Jews, there are at least 3 opinions. I'll explain what the Talmud is later in this video, but for now, you should know that much of the Talmud is a record of debates. For example, there are lots of passages in which the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai disagree on how to interpret a certain aspect of Jewish law. The Talmud records both opinions so that the reader can see both sides. Generally speaking, the house of Shammai was more strict, and the house of Hillel was more lenient. Also, please note that the opinions of the house of Hillel tend to be the ones that are followed today. Ever hear the phrase, "do unto others as you would have them do unto you"? This is known as the Golden Rule, and was followed by his son Simon, of whom very little is known, and then by Simon's son Gamliel. Gamliel is notable.
All right, so Gamliel, who existed during the time of Yeshua and was very aware of Yeshua, he even makes comments in the New Testament about Yeshua. This is who Paul was sitting under. So had not Paul had a conversion to Yeshua, guess who we would see in this line here? Or a branch out of this as one of the sages of the school of Hillel. It would have been Paul. Interesting.
For several reasons. First of all, he's considered to be one of the greatest Jewish teachers of all time. He was also the first person to be called Rabban, a word closely related to rabbi. Finally, he is the only one of the Tanaim who is clearly named in the Christian New Testament, even though the Tanaim and the first few generations of Christians lived at the exact same time. In the book of Acts, Gamliel is mentioned as having been a teacher of the Apostle Paul. Paul, of course, went on to become the most important figure in the development of Christianity, other than Jesus himself. Serving alongside Gamliel as Av Beit Din was Yohanan ben Zakkai. He's generally the person considered to have been the first official rabbi. He outlived Gamliel and therefore also served alongside Gamliel's son, Simon.
All right, and let me just say this. Around this time, of course, Paul was already dead when the second temple was destroyed. So we're right at that time around here. Of course, Akiva comes hundreds of years after that, but Josephus was there at the destruction of the second temple, and his writings are very fascinating. It's a detailed account of everything that took place.
Simon and Yohanan were therefore the 2 leaders of the Sanhedrin in the year 70 CE, when the Romans laid siege on Jerusalem. However, each one met with a very different fate. Simon was beheaded just before the temple was destroyed. Yohanan, on the other hand, is said to have escaped the city in a coffin. Supposedly, he managed to arrange a meeting with General Vespasian, in which he predicted that Vespasian would go on to become the emperor. According to...
Okay, now, I don't know that to be true. I do know the writings of Josephus, and the story is from Josephus is that Josephus had a meeting with this person and predicted that he would become the next Caesar. So I'm not aware of this one. Maybe he did predict it and Josephus knew this and used what he had said. I don't know that to be true, but I do know that Josephus in his writings said that he prophesied that Vespasian would be the next Caesar. And of course, this is the son of Vespasian is Titus. And Flavius Josephus was a prisoner of Titus, who eventually, through that, he became friends with Titus and was there with Titus when the temple was destroyed, and he wrote all about it. So I know that side of it, but I was not aware of Zakkai prophesying this.
Legend, Vespasian offered Yohanan 3 wishes, and one of the things that Yohanan asked for was permission for he and his students to relocate to the city of Yavne and establish a school there. Vespasian allowed this, And thus, in the year 70 CE, the center point for Jewish scholarship moved from Jerusalem to Yavne. There, Yohanan ben Zakkai took on the role of Nasi, as well as that of Av Beit Din, teaching students such as Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Joshua ben Hananiah. Eventually, however, the title of Nasi passed back to the house of Hillel, with Simon's son, Gamliel II, taking on that role in 80 CE. However, the most important teacher during this period was arguably Rabbi Akiva ben Joseph.
And we're going to see his name. He's one of the earlier sages. You may recognize his name. Later is Rashi, Maimonides, which is the Rambam. These are the early sages. And by the way, guess what? They weren't even Jewish. They were converts to Judaism. And so that kind of makes sense. Those who say they are Jews and they are not, it starts to make sense now. It gets even worse as we go down through history and we start branching off to all the different rabbis that are important today, mostly out of Eastern Europe and Russia. Anyway, this is who we're talking about. Let's move on, folks. I really appreciate my brother, Adam. He did a really good short presentation on this very thing, on who the Synagogue of Satan is. I couldn't have done it better. Let's look at what Adam says, very short, and then we're going to look at the code that I got for you. It's kind of harsh. Let's learn something.
And sisters in Christ, I am here to warn you that the Synagogue of Satan is real and is deceiving Christians at this very moment. I know because I actually came out of this Synagogue of Satan, and I'm here as a witness by the power of the Most High that we all need to come out of her. And if you have just a few minutes, this may be worth your time, because Jesus says exactly who the Synagogue of Satan is without any doubt. So let's get right into the scriptures, and let's go right to Revelation 2:9, where it says, I know your works and tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Let's read one more. Revelation 3:9, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. So obviously these passages have spurred much conversation, much finger pointing, and lots of confusion. And so I'd like to just continue to search deeper in the scriptures, because I believe Messiah clearly points out who this group of people are. And actually there's a bigger warning, and it's not just about finding out who this group are, but to recognize their doctrine has spread and multiplied, and it's actually in the churches today. And I want to share that with you, so please stick around. So John 8:37, he is speaking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day, and he's acknowledging right here, I know that you're Abraham's seed. So like in the physical, yeah, okay, you are the descendants of Abraham, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my father, and you do that which you have seen with your father. So he's recognizing that, yeah, you may be the descendants of Abraham, but by your deeds, by your actions, someone else is your father. They answered and said to him, well, Abraham's our father. Yehusha, that's how I understand Jesus' Hebrew name. So Yehusha said unto him, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham, which Genesis 26 clearly states that Abraham kept the laws of the Most High, aka the Torah. Verse 40, but now you seek to kill me, a man that has told you the truth, which is, that's nomenclature, or that's a nickname for the Torah. Psalm 119, 142 says, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and your Torah is the truth. So Messiah is like, hey, I'm teaching you the Torah, and you want to kill me. Which I have heard of Elohim, this did not Abraham, right? Abraham's not killing people over telling him about the Torah. You do the deeds of your father. Then said they unto him, we be not born of fornication, we have one father, even Elohim. Yehusha said unto them, if Elohim were your father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from Elohim. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Now, here he's pinpointing right now who the synagogue of Satan is. You are of your father, the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, in the Torah, in the law. It's why he's called the lawless one, or the rebellious one, or the leader of all rebellion, the father of lies, the father of murder. He's the father of breaking the law of the Most High, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, at every point, if you evaluate the Gospels, Messiah was teaching the Torah of the Most High faithfully. So, because I tell you the Torah, you believe me not. Let's go over to Matthew 27, and let's take a look at verse 24. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See you to it. So he's like, hey, I believe he's innocent, right?
All right, so to be really clear on what he's talking about, this is when Yeshua's about to be handed over. He's going to be scourged and crucified, and the Jews are trying to get him, or the Pharisees are trying to get him killed, right? Pilate has judged him as innocent. And he says, I wash my hands of this. Watch what happens when the Pharisees reply.
This is what Rome said. Then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children. Then,
now, folks, when he said this, his blood be on us and on our children, I believe the high priest actually called down a curse on Judah and the rabbinic. Plain and simple. This is why they have suffered. This is why they've had such a hard time all through history. This is why, folks, I believe that the Holocaust happened was because of this curse right here.
released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Yahusha, he delivered him to be crucified. So what can be more satanic than a statement like this? His blood be on us and on our children. Let's go to 1 Thessalonians 2:14.
Let me just ask you, theoretically, folks, what do you think is going to happen when you make a statement like that about the Son of the Most High who has been killed? That is a curse.
15. You'll see Paul pinpoints the same group of people. For you, brethren, became followers of the churches of Elohim, which in Judea are in Messiah Yahusha. For you have also suffered like things of your own countrymen, even as they have of the Jews, who both killed the Master Yahusha and their own prophets, and have persecuted us, and they please not Elohim, and are contrary to all men. John the Baptist had similar sentiments towards this group of people. Matthew 3:7. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees come to his baptism, he said to them, O generation of vipers, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come? We know Satan is the serpent. He is the dragon. And so Matthew 23:13, speaking of these serpents, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, neither suffer you them that are entering to go in. So, the literal church of Satan is a pretty wicked thing today. Obviously, they're literally worshiping Satan. But something that's a little more evil than that is something that's covert, something that appears to be serving the Most High and teaching the ways of salvation. But if people are trying to get in and are kept back because of the false doctrine, what could be more satanic than that? So he's literally telling the Pharisees, the religious leaders, he's like, hey, you're not going into heaven. And even the people that want to go in, you're not letting them go in. What could be more satanic than that? Matthew 23:15, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you compass sea and land to make one proselyte. So he's like, you go across the entire world, right, to make one convert. And when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. Going down to verse 33, you serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you shall kill and crucify, and some of them you shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you, who's he talking to? This religious system, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. So our Messiah said specifically, this group of people is all the blood of the prophets is on them. John 7:19 says, this is Messiah speaking to the Pharisees. Did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you keeps the law, the Torah? Why do you go?
All right, so let's talk about that. They are fresh out of Babylon, right? They've come back and they got the Talmud. And you know what it says in the Talmud, that the rabbis give themselves authority to override Moses and of the Most High, right? So they weren't keeping the law there per se, because they would write new laws and loopholes to get out of the original law. So Yeshua is telling them, did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you keep it?
About to kill me. Matthew 15:9. But in vain, he's talking about the Pharisees and Sadducees, the religious system, the religious leaders. But in vain they do worship me. In vain. Why? Teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And most people don't understand. This is where I can speak from experience. I did grow up in Judaism, and Judaism 100% supersedes the Torah. And we can just read it for ourselves. The Talmud, which is not scripture, it's not in the Bible. It's a book of oral traditions. It's rabbis discussing different topics and coming to conclusions. And so the Talmud is the central text of Rabbinic Judaism and the primary source of Jewish religious law. And so this is their fault. This is their sin. They literally did away with the commandments of the Most High and replaced them with the commandments of men. And so this religious system is the Synagogue of Satan. It's the sneakiest on earth. And it's not just limited to this one religious group. It's permeated, of course, throughout all the earth. How many people are promising eternal life and promising salvation, but if they're not following the way that our Messiah told them to have salvation, they won't have it. And they're following the same fault as the Pharisees and Sadducees. We'll get clearer on that in a second. Revelation 18:4 says, And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. Revelation 18:24 pinpoints this system, and in her, this religious system, was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. We just read who Messiah pinpointed that was. Revelation 18:13. So this is the goods that her soul lusted after. It just got done talking about gold and silver and all sorts of precious things. But this is where it ends up right here. The souls of men. And there's nothing on this earth that is more precious than the souls of men. So if there's a religious system or religious systems that keep people from the gate and yet promise eternal life, what more wicked of a system is that? And so I ask, is there a religious system in place that's promising salvation through Jesus and preaching a false gospel today? Well, yes, there is. Luke 17:19, he said unto him, Arise, go your way, your faith has made you whole. And this is the thing we all can agree on. The Messiah heals us. He makes us whole. He takes us from something ugly to something beautiful, something sinful to something holy and righteous. Now, it's after that moment where everything is different. John 5:14, after Yeshua finds him in the temple and said to him, this is the one he healed, Behold, you are made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto you. So it's like after we've received salvation, well, what do? Do we just keep looking at how righteous Messiah is and just rest in that? Or do we have an obligation? If you look at the Gospels and take an honest observation, Messiah at every turn tells the believer what they need to do. So 1 John 3:4, whoever commits sin transgresses also the law. For sin is transgression of the law, aka the Torah. So what did Messiah just say? He's like, hey, your faith made you whole. Now that you're whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto you. And so we have to ask, do those words mean anything to us? Matthew 19:16, behold, one came to him and said to him, Good master, what thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? Now you have to ask yourself right now, Messiah, his answer, does that apply to you? Or does it only apply to this man that asked the question? And here's what Messiah says. He said to him, "Why do you call me good? There is none good but one, that is Elohim. But if you will enter into life, keep the commandments," aka the Torah. Hallelujah. Romans 3:31. Some of you that may be thinking of some passages from Paul, like, wait a minute, we're not under the law was done away with, nailed to the cross, weak. There's all sorts of verses.
Let me just say this about Paul. He's very difficult to understand because he's speaking to people that know in context what he's speaking of. So he doesn't make the distinction for the reader when he comes against the law and say it's bad, and then turn right around in another place and say the law is good. The reader doesn't realize that he's speaking about the oral law and the Torah, that he's speaking about each one specifically in a context. So he's not bipolar, but he is hard to understand because it's not made known or clear to the reader.
That if you take a look at 2 Peter 3, Peter warns us that Paul writes about some things that sometimes are hard to understand, and that people that are unlearned twist the things that Paul say into lawlessness and their own destruction. And so we have to recognize Paul also said this, do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid, yea, we establish the law. He was just explaining a sacrificial system that was changing from the animal sacrifices to the final sacrifice of Messiah. But he's like, hang on, just because that how we're saved changes, that doesn't mean how we behave, how we serve the Most High. That doesn't change. Let's go to Revelation 22:13 through 15. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So this is Messiah declaring this. Are you listening? Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. For without, so there's going to be people that aren't going to be in there. Now listen, these are all lawbreakers, dogs, sorcerers, whoremongers, murderers, idolaters, and whoever loves and makes a lie. So consider David was a man after Yahweh's own heart. And so the other part of this I want to share with you is that we shouldn't just be keeping the commandments out of a fear of not making it. We should yearn and love to do the will of the Most High. David was a man after Yahweh's own heart, and this is what he spoke. Psalm 118:97. Oh, how I love your law. Right? I love your Torah. It's my meditation all the day. Through your commandments have you made me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation. Now, this may seem silly, but it is the Torah that is wisdom in the Most High's eyes, as opposed to the earthly, the man's wisdom that we've all grown up to know. That's the measure of wisdom. I understand more than the ancients because I keep your precepts. It's a part of the law. I have refrained my feet from every evil way, that I might keep your word. I have not departed from your judgments, for you have taught me. How sweet are your words unto my taste, yes, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Through your precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And consider, Paul also said, for I delight in the law of Elohim after the inward man. He also said, wherefore the law is holy, the commandment holy, just and good. And we know the chief apostle said this, it is written, be holy, for I'm holy. And I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, it is the law, the Torah, that tells us, instructs us how to be holy. So don't follow the footsteps of the synagogue of Satan that trapped the souls of men thousands of years ago. Still do it today. However, her doctrines, the wine of her fornication, has permeated into other religious systems, including mainstream Christianity. So I implore you to consider the things that are said today. Research it for yourself. Pray about it. Ask your Heavenly Father if the things shared with you today are true or not. Blessings to you in our Messiah Yahushua's name.
Amen. Thank you to my brother for doing that, for putting that out. It's a good little study. You guys, he's right. I just want to say this, because there are some people who will argue, oh no, Jonathan, the Synagogue of Satan is the Catholic Church, and yada, 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 and they have a whole teaching on that. I will agree that there are parallels, but the original that Yeshua and John and others identified is the Pharisaical. is the rabbinic that came after. Imagine this: Yah destroys his temple. So after he rents his garment and nullifies the priesthood, destroys his temple, and then removes the Jewish people. And by this time, it was mostly Judah in the land, because remember, the northern tribes, they had been scattered into the nations. This is why Yeshua said, start in Judah first, and then go into the nations looking for who? The nations. Israel, who had become Goyim at this time. That's who they were going to go look for. You ever wondered why, one of the disciples, the one who doubted, Thomas, you know where he was killed? He was killed in India, looking for lost sheep of Israel. India. Anyway, so I will agree with those of you that say that there's a parallel with the Catholic Church, because there was a hijacking of the way, and then we get Rabbinic Judaism. The same thing happened with the way of those that followed Yeshua. 300 years later, hijacked and became the Roman Catholic Church, and they completely redesigned and rewrote the person and the character of Yeshua. Anyway, Satan creeps in and he misleads, right? The same thing that happened to Judah also happened to the Christians. This is why we have 40,000 plus Protestant denominations. Everybody thinks they're right. Anyway, so Synagogue of Satan, we've identified clearly who this is. So you want to go take a look at the code now? Let's go look at this. All right, so here we go. It has changed a little bit since you saw it last, folks, but we do have the synagogue, or the Temple of Satan, encoded here. It is, as you can see, pretty high up in the text. So we're up in Genesis here, and most of the Torah. By the time we get to the noon here, we're down in Joshua at this point. As you can see, I've only got one place highlighted. It's right in the meat of the access term. What we have mostly is ELS terms. That's what I've been working on. I will go through line by line and see exactly where the text is and how it's significant to the different ELS terms. Like, we have some terms that are linear, that are obviously going to be right there in the text, encoded. We have that in several places. We have things that are encoded, but also clusters. We have clustering all over here. At that point, the cluster over here. So where do I even start? First of all, if we're talking about Pharisees, we're going to be talking about relative terms, right? So things like Talmud, the Zohar, the Gemara, the Mishnah, different rabbis like Akiva and Rambam and Rashi and all of these sages, right? So that would be what we're looking at, right? So right off the bat, let's just establish that the Talmud is here. We can see the Talmud encoded right here, and the Talmud is encoded right here. Okay, we do have Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is encoded right there with the Talmud, and we've got the Kabbalah encoded right here, right? And so what is the green word there? That's the word for witchcraft, or magic, one of the two. I think it's magic. Yeah, the word for magic. That word is also right here, connected to the actual access term. So the word magic here, kind of crazy. My eye You know, when you see repetition in the text, vertical like that, it just kind of stands out to me. So as I'm searching through this, you know, and getting further and further away from the access term, I immediately noticed the 666 anomalies here. So three sixes, which is Vav, and it's also right down here, connecting to the current year, which is 2026. 2026 is also here. And by the way, this one and this one are encoded in the same skip pattern, meaning one is divisible by the other. It's just a little smaller. Abomination here, but also linear here, abomination. All right, so you may have heard words like Zohar. That's right there, the Zohar. The Zohar is also up here. The Zohar is a book, it's like a Kabbalah book. All right. Donald Trump is also here. D. Trump. Why is he here? Well, because he's right slap dab in the middle of all of this. I'm not saying he's a part of the satanic synagogue in the sense that he even knows what is going on. You know, and I've talked about how he converted to Judaism. Folks, that was a political thing. That wasn't, you know, he's literally praying at the Western Wall and he's going to Sneerson's grave and stuff. He's playing a role because there's, you know, his daughter got married to one of the most powerful families in the United States. I just saw that right there. Anyway, we do have names of rabbis in here, like Akiva. Akiva is one of the sages. And by the way, a handful of the early sages that Judaism follows today were not even Jewish, you guys. I kid you not. And this is well known in Judaism. They were converts to Judaism. Like the Rambam. The Rambam encoded here in the white, the Rambam. I think this is the word for witchcraft right here, folks, starting there. Yeah, this is witchcraft, and the green one is magic. So I talked about the Zohar. Let's talk about the Mishnah. Where is it? The Mishnah in the blue here. The Mishnah and the Gemara in the orange. The Gemara is there. We also have the name Netanyahu spans this whole thing. Netanyahu. And Yeshua uses the word vipers. Well, that's right here, vipers. Vipers. And let's go look at the verse there. So the only one that I got highlighted is, in fact, the Midbar. And let's see what it says. 19:20. But the man that shall be unclean. All right, so incidentally, chapter 19, verse 1, starting at verse 1, is about the red heifer and the purification process. But this particular line with Mikdash Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the temple of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or the, you know, that word is synonymous. It could also mean synagogue or whatever. Is right here at a 90-degree angle. So, but the man that be unclean and shall not purify himself, that soul shall be cut off among the congregation, because he defiled the sanctuary of Yah. The water of separation that hath not been sprinkled him is unclean. You see the sanctuary or the temple or the synagogue of Yah right there. So when Yeshua, and by the way, this is the trouble, Hatzerah, the root here, Zerah. If we had Et Zerah, which would be the time of trouble, which you see in the mention of Jacob's trouble, this is basically an ideology. This is not necessarily connected to the temple on the mount, but the Pharisees as a group. We see all that corresponding information here, folks, and we haven't even gotten into the verses from the prophets. Mostly I want to see. It will be interesting to see what's going on in the Torah up here. I can see this is there. This is talking about Pharaoh right there. So this is, look at that, the Hebrews. It's the Hebrews right there. So Synagogue of Satan, still developing. We're going to look at, like, this is Ezekiel down here. This is Jeremiah, and we got even Isaiah in there. This is Isaiah, and then 2 Kings right there. So we do have the prophets through here that are going to be speaking. And even about the house of Yah. So it's probably speaking specifically about the temple, based on the configuration that's come up so far in this. And again, this wasn't to disparage or to alienate or to hurt anyone. This is not hate speech. It's just facts, folks. It is, it's either there or not there. I've always said that about the codes. And sometimes this is uncomfortable, especially with some of the rabbis I've had to deal with concerning Yeshua codes, and like Isaiah 53, where there's this contention and there's this explanation of why these codes aren't valid and codes are only here and they're not there. And they have all these rules that they've made up. And I'm not saying the methodology is completely off. The methodology seems to be solid, but we make amendments and we make excuses of what anyway. I'm rambling now. The bottom line is who we have today. You can track all the way back to the destruction of the temple. It's the very same ones that have disparaging writings about Yeshua. It's the very same ones that Yeshua came against because they had these man-made traditions and laws that they piled upon the people. And he said, you won't even keep these laws yourself, and yet you put them on the people. It's specific. So there's a lot to consider. And I hope this doesn't alienate and offend. That is not my intention on this. It's simply to bring you the truth in this. And I'm sure I'm going to have some in those communities. There are some that go after people like Tobias Singer, who will just love to tear me apart and prove that, what I'm showing you is just, it's defamation and whatever. I could foresee that kind of things. So I am putting myself out there by revealing this to you, which is, where I live is very significant to all this. I can't say that any direction that I point that there's a synagogue not from here. And I'm not complaining or anything like that. I love these people. Again, I'm not anti-Semitic. I myself am Hebrew. So I take a stance like Adam and how I see this. So I know I'm not alone in how I see these things developing according to scripture and right there on the news. It's like I'm reading my Bible and you can kind of follow everything that's happening. And like I said, some of the players and the handlers involved, I'm not sure that they understand the gravity or what role they're playing even though I'm convinced some of them are kind of forcing these things to happen. And again, I got to be careful with what I say, because, policy, again, handlers have to be very wise and thoughtful on that at all times. I'm not trying to get eliminated here. Okay. So that's what I got for you right now. We'll probably be looking at this a lot more. I'm sure we will be looking at this some more when we go through the scriptures. I'm also working a handful of other codes. It's all time consuming. If you could, folks, we'd appreciate your help. What else can I say without begging? And I don't like doing that. I don't like being in a position where I'm in need. And I realize that everybody goes through times of drought, and things dry up, and things don't pan out, and issues come up, car trouble, and everything falls on you. Everybody has that. So I'm no different. I appreciate those that do help. Shalom to you. May Yah bless you, keep you until we see again in the next video.